Well, let us start with requirement analysis. So what is a requirement analysis, right? What is a requirement analysis that we have discussed in an introductory level in the first module, right? So we have introduced in the first module about what is a requirement analysis. So this class we will be discussing in detail about requirement analysis. So let us discuss what is a requirement analysis. It is actually related to the analysis of system boundaries and system characteristics. Just listen carefully. We are actually analyzing the system boundaries and system characteristics. So what is that boundaries? So when we are actually collecting the requirement, we should be able to set a boundary. Okay, this is what I am going to do. For this particular budget, this is what we are going to do. So we are making a boundaries, right? So apart beyond that, we are not going to do. If you want beyond that, then give the requirement. This is what we think. So requirement analysis is we are actually doing the analysis for identifying the system boundaries and system characteristics. That is what the first point is showing, right? The second point is the requirement analysis engineering involves requirement elicitation, right? Documentation and maintenance of requirements. So these three things are there in the requirement analysis, right? I'll repeat. What is that requirement elicitation? Getting the intelligent information. Getting the intelligent information from whom? From the customer or the user, right? And when the informations are collected, what you will do? You will do the documentation. You will do the documentation. Once the documentation is completed, you have to maintain that requirements. You have to maintain that requirements because it should not go beyond the boundaries, right? So you have to maintain the requirements. So these three things are there in the requirement analysis. Okay. The next point is the requirement engineering is a repeatable and systematic technique. Like the other phases, right, or the software life cycle, requirement engineering is also having a repeatable and systematic technique. Some processes there for requirement engineering, right? So in each and every phase, right, in each and every phase of the requirement engineering life cycle, requirements are analyzed and evaluated. Right? So we'll discuss that phases. What are those phases? Let us discuss that. Right. Meanwhile, you just understand for requirement analysis also there are number of phases. Right. So each phases, what they are doing is they are analyzing the requirements and it is evaluated. Okay. Why are they evaluating it? To find the consistency and completeness. Right. Whether we are able to complete that project, whether it is correct, and whether we are able to do that project. Right. So that for that only we are evaluating also. That is, we are analyzing the requirement and also we are evaluating that. That is why we are doing that, to find the consistency and completeness of the requirement. This is what we call as the requirement analysis, right? So what is the requirement analysis? To find or to analyze the system boundaries and system characteristics. That is what is called as requirement analysis. Fine. So if that is not properly analyzed, right? If the boundaries is not properly analyzed, if the system characteristics is not properly analyzed, then what is the problem, right? The problem is there are many problems due to usage of wrong requirements, right? There are many problems. What are those problems, right? So the first thing is the delayed and over budget projects, right? Your projects will be, right, delayed if you are not gathering the requirements properly. If the requirements are not gathered properly, right, what happens is that the first problem is your project will get delayed. You will be confused while doing the project, right? So the project will get delayed, and of course, if the project is delaying, automatically your budget will get increased. Is it right? Because every month you have to give the salary to the employees or the developers, right? So when the project is delayed, automatically your budget will also increase, right? That is why delayed and over budget projects. Okay. The second point is the product does not reach the intent purpose because your requirements is not clear. So what happens? Ultimately, your product will not reach the intended purpose. You won't be able to develop the required product. What the customer asked, right? The customer may be asking this particular product, but you won't be able to develop it. You won't be able to complete that particular part. Okay, so in other words, what we can do is, what we can say is, the customers are not satisfied. The customers are not satisfied with the product. Okay, the errors encountered in the development of the system, right? See, when there is the issue in the requirement, automatically the development system, like the development system, will be having some errors. Okay, if you are having that errors, what happens is that that errors will continue because you are not having the clear requirements. So the errors will continue until the deployment of your product, right? Till the deployment, when the product is published or when the product is deployed, until that the same errors will continue, right? If the errors continue, what happens in the maintenance part? As already we have discussed about the maintenance in the first module. Maintenance is the highly costly phase, right? Maintenance phase, right? What happens? That particular maintenance phase will again increases a lot, because every time the problems will occur, one developer has to go there, they have to maintain it, and then they have to come back. So the problem will continue in the maintenance phase also. That is why requirement analysis should be perfect, right? Should be perfect. You should be able to identify the correct requirements, right? So we have discussed the problems in the requirement analysis now, right? So now we are going to discuss about the phases. We discussed about phases in the first slide, right? So that is what I'm discussing now. So the requirement engineering is having a process, right? Requirement engineering is having a process. What are those processes, right? The first step is they are doing the feasibility study. Any project, even if you are doing your project, first you have to study the feasibility, right? Feasibility in the sense, what is a feasibility? First, whether this particular project is doable. Very simple, right? Whether this particular project is doable, right? Whether you are able to do this project, right? Based on the customer requirements, they will be telling the high level requirement. Customer will be telling, I need a particular product like this. I want this product, this kind of product. Then you have to think, okay, we have to identify the feasibility, whether we are able to, what is that, do the project, right? Whether we are able to do the project, whether based on the say budget, right? They'll be fixing a budget, right? So based on this budget, whether we are able to do the project, that is called as the feasibility study. That is called as the feasibility study. Even in your project, your mini project and main project, the first step is you have to do the feasibility study, and then you have to document it. You should have a first step, that is feasibility study. Okay. So what is a feasibility study? Study whether you are able to do the project, whether the project can be able to do based on the budget proposed. Okay. So that is what is called as the feasibility study. Then we will be doing the requirement gathering, right? The next step will be doing the requirement gathering. Okay. So what is that requirement gathering? Okay. The requirement gathering in the sense, we will be doing the requirements. We'll be doing the requirements, or we'll be getting the requirements from the customer, right? From the customer. Okay. So from this particular part, that is from this requirement gathering, our objective is to reach the requirement document. That is, when we are getting the requirements from the customer, we should be able to clearly define one by one the requirements in the requirement document. In the requirement document. So for that, these many steps are there. These many steps are there. So from requirement gathering, right? From requirement gathering, two branches are going, right? Either of the branch we can select. For example, let us see this particular branch, right? From requirement gathering, right? We are listing out the required specification. Okay, from the requirement gathering. From where we are getting the requirements, we are getting it from the customers or the users. We'll be doing so many process, from so many interviews, so many so many processes we are doing to get the requirements, right? Once the requirement is gathered, right, we are actually, what we are doing is we are detailing, we are listing out the required specification. And once the required specification is listed, each specification is actually validated, right? How you are validating it, again you have to discuss with the customer whether this requirement is correct or not. That is what is the validation. So if the customer is satisfied, fine, the requirement is validated. Okay. So this process actually doing 2 or 3 times, right? After doing this, if the validation is successful, you can able to do the requirement documents. You can able to create the requirement document. Okay. So, and also in the requirement specification, right? Once the requirement specification is completed, you have to convert that into 2 processes. One is user and system requirements, right? These are the user requirements. These are the system requirements, right? You have to categorize that and you have to list it out. That also it should be included in the requirement document. Okay, so you're just able to understand the branches, right? You are getting the requirements. You are listing out the requirements. validating the requirements with the customer, right? Once it is successful, once the customer agreed with the requirement, okay, so you can document it, right? And also once the requirement is listed, you can convert that into what, user and system requirements. Once that is completed, that is also should be documented, okay. Sometimes, right, you won't be able to do all this process, right? So for that, what you can do is you can show a prototype, yeah, system models, already available system models, right? So that you can show it, or the customer may be coming with the system model. So like this, I need a document, sorry, I need a product. So like this, I need a product. Likewise, based on the already existed software, right, they will be asking for the software product, right? So based on the system model also, you can able to gather, or you can able to document the requirements. So all these branches, right, is making the purpose of that particular branches is for making the required document, okay. So how it is done, what is the method, that is what we are going to discuss, okay, in each and every topic, right? The first one is feasibility study. As I already told, the feasibility study is based mainly on the necessity of the proposed system, okay. This is whether this particular software is really needed, right? Whether this particular product is really needed, right, for this organization, okay, and domain information of the system, right? So these things you have to first study it. What is that you are going to study? You are going to study the necessity of the software, whether it is really needed, whether the software is really needed, that you are identifying it, okay. That is what the feasibility study is for, finding out the necessity of the software, okay. Once that is okay, this particular software is required for this organization, we have identified that, right? The next step is you will be asking some questions. Does overall objective of the organization is satisfied by the system, right? So each organization will be having a overall objectives, right? So this is the objectives of the organization. Whether this system will be able to create the objective of the organization, whether this particular system, whether particular software reaches the objective of the organization. That is the first question you will be asking. And if you are able to get the answer, excellent, fine. The next step is, can the system be developed with the proposed budget and timing? As I already told, right? If the system, if you're planning to develop a system and if you're having the budget, you should ensure that whether the system can be developed within the proposed budget and the timeline. You will be having a delivery time, right? This is a delivery time. We have to complete the project. So you have to think whether you are able to complete the project in the specified timeline. That is also you have to do it in the feasibility study. Can the proposed system made to coexist with the existing system? Okay. Say for example, you are developing system, right? That particular software, if you are installing in in that particular client customer company, right? What happens, right? They have to change the complete process. If it is like that, then it is the worst system, right? So it has to easily adaptable to that particular organization. That means the existing system, right, which is already available in the customer's environment, should not affect by this proposed software system, okay. So can the proposed system made to coexist with the existing system, right? It should be user friendly with the existing system. So they have to feel comfortable, right? Yes, because of the software, our job is made too easy. That is what the users or the customer should feel. That is why this question is asked. Can the proposed system made to coexist with the existing system, right? Fine. The next is the very important part. Now we are going to get the intelligent information of requirements. That is what is called as the requirement elicitation. Let me see how many. Okay, fine. Okay, so intelligent information, that is the requirement elicitation for software. So what is that? So it means that you are gathering the major requirements, right? Major requirements from the customer. Okay, so in this process, the technical professionals, who and all will be there? The technical professionals, right? Technical professionals means the software developers, system engineers, right? And users of the system and the customers. So all these people, right, they will they will discuss and they will identify the requirements. They will discuss and finalize the requirements. So in this process, the technical professionals like software developers and system engineers, they will work together with the users of the system as well as the customers, right? So once they discussed and identifying the requirements, right? So they will be able to identify, okay, these are the problems. So these problems can be solved by the help of this particular software. That is what it is actually done in the requirement, right? So they will discuss, they'll identify the problem, and they will tell that this particular software will be able to solve the problem, right? So what are those problems? What the proposed system should be provide. So what the proposed system, that is what the software will do. The first basic question, what the software will do. That is what the proposed system should provide, right? When the expected services, what are the expected services from the system, right? What are the expected services from the system? And third one is, what are the required characteristics of the system? What are the required characteristics of the system? And then finally, what are the required hardware and software constraints of the system? If you are able to get all these answers, right? If you are able to get all these answers, you can immediately go for the next phase, design phase, right? So the problems discussed are what the proposed system should provide, right? What the software should provide, okay? What the expected services from the system, and what are the required characteristics of the system, and then what are the required hardware and software constraints of the system. So these are the problems they have discussed, right? Fine. So here also there is a process, requirement elicitation process. Okay. Let us see one by one. First thing is background knowledge. Listen carefully, very important, right? So the first point is background knowledge. What is the background knowledge? If you are going to develop a software, the software developer and the system engineer, right? They should know about what is the basic steps or process done in the software which they are going to implement, right? For example, the developers are going to develop a project on ATM, right? How the ATM works, okay? So they should first know how the ATM manually works. Is it right? How the ATM manually works, right? Based on that only they can able to do the software, right? So the background knowledge should be there with the developers and the system engineers. In other words, the domain knowledge, for example, say they are going to develop a software for a healthcare system. A healthcare company is there, right? Healthcare company is there. So the developers should know about the domain knowledge. Without the domain knowledge, they won't be able to develop a system. Okay, so that is what your background knowledge, right? That is what your background knowledge. Once the background knowledge is attained, then they can check with the requirements. Then they can check with the requirements, right? So because without the background knowledge, you won't be able to get the requirements. You won't be able to understand the requirements, right? Right. This is what the problem with the background knowledge. If the particular software developer is not having the background knowledge, they won't be able to get the requirements. Okay. Fine. Right. So once the background knowledge is attained, right, what they will do is that they will start doing the requirement gathering, right? They'll start doing the requirement gathering, right? Once the requirement is gathered, they will classify the requirement. They will classify the requirement. See, each and every step, right? It is actually what is that? Inner loop is there, right? When the requirement is gathered, right, they will be classifying the requirement. Again, they will be validating it. If any issue is there, then again they will gather the requirement and then it is classified, right? So likewise, every process is actually as a looping process, right? A looping process, right? If the particular thing is not attained, then we have to again go back to the previous process, identify or get the required details, and then we have to do the next process, right? The same thing is applied for all the phases. Okay, let us continue, right? So once a requirement is gathered, the requirement is classified. Okay, once a requirement is classified, we will be identifying the conflict resolution. Say, for example, what is a conflict resolution? Say, for example, in the particular customer's environment, right, there are a number of stakeholders. Stakeholders means users, right? Number of users will be there, right? So each we'll be going to each of the user, right, and we'll be getting the requirements, right? So when they are getting the requirements, right, if there is a conflict with the organizational objectives, So in organizational objectives or the customer organizations there, no, they'll be having an objective, they'll be having a process. There will be some conflict, right? It may conflict with the organizational objectives. So at that time we have to clarify it, right? So if there is a conflict in the resolution, right, then we have to redo the classification part, right? So this we have to do. Once there is no conflict, then we can go for the requirements priority. So which is the first priority? Which is the first priority? Okay, whether if you are listed with the 10 priorities, 10 requirements, right? So which is the first requirement priority? That you will be prioritizing it, right? Once that is prioritized, you will again do the requirements check, and then the requirement is listed out, and then you will be doing the documentation. So these many phases are there. So it is a cyclic phase. It is a cyclic phase. See, first background knowledge. You should get the background knowledge, gather the requirement, classify the requirement, ensure that there is no conflict, right? Once there is no conflict, prioritize the requirement, then check the requirement, right? Finally, document the requirement. This is what the requirement elicitation process. Okay, fine. That is what I have explained in each and every slide. Let us go fast into it. The analyst must understand. Analyst means what? The first model we discussed, right? What is that? What is we discussed? The business analyst, right? What he or she will do is that the analyst must understand the background and domain knowledge of the application that is being developed, right? The background and domain knowledge. Just please keep in mind, background and domain knowledge means if they are going for any particular domain, healthcare system, banking system, right? If it is a banking is the domain, then they should know about the they should understand the domain knowledge or the background knowledge of the bank system, right? If it is a healthcare system, they should know about what is happening in the healthcare system. So likewise, an example here I have shown is an ATM. If a system is developed for ATM, then the developer should have some basic knowledge of how the ATM works. Okay, this is the example I have given. If you know any other example, you can write it in the examination, no issues, right? Here I have shown a simple example. Once the background knowledge is attained, then you have to go for gathering the requirements. So gathering the requirements means you'll be keeping the interviews or discussions with the stakeholders and users. Okay, so to gather the requirements. The next step is we'll be classifying the requirements. This activity includes the organizing of the requirement gathered from different sources, right? So you're classifying the requirements from different sources. I mean, you are getting the requirements from different sources. Based on that, you are classifying it. You are classifying it, right? Once the requirements are classified, what you are doing is you are identifying the conflicts, right? As I already told, the conflict may be coming, right? There will be some contradiction. The organization and business rules, right? The users will be following, somebody else will be following some business rules, somebody else will be following the organization's rules, right? There may be some contradiction between that, right? You should ensure that there is no conflicts, that there is no contradictions in your requirements. If there is a conflict, then that will continue up to the maintenance phase, right? That is why you have to ensure that there is no conflict in the requirements. Okay. So what you are doing is you will be doing the discussions with stakeholders and requirement engineers. Okay, stakeholders and requirement engineers. Fine. The next step is requirement prioritization, discovering the important requirement by interacting with the stakeholders and organization, then to prioritize the important part, right? So you may have listed so many requirements, right? What you will do, then you have to prioritize it. How you are prioritizing it? You cannot prioritize it. That is, the requirement engineer won't prioritize it. So what the requirement engineer will do is he will discuss with the users. He will discuss with the stakeholders. So based on the discussion, they will prioritize the requirements, right? Fine. The next is requirement check. This involves checking the stakeholders' expectation, right? Validating it. You have the requirements listed, prioritized, right? You will check with the stakeholders and users whether these requirements are correct. That is what the requirement checking. If it is not correct, then you have to again go through the process. Okay, that is what your requirement check. Okay, right. Once that is done, you will be making the documentation, specification documentation, or requirement documentation, right? So once the requirement documentation is done, right, then you can go for the planning phase. You can go for the planning phase. So we have discussed the general process. We have discussed the general requirement elicitation process. So this is the process. Okay. So there are many methods. There are many techniques. Right. Let us see the techniques in the next class. Okay. So what are those techniques? Interviews. The first elicitation technique is interviews. Then questionnaire. Right. We have to put questions with the users and stakeholders. Right. So questionnaire, and then social analysis. Right. So and prototyping. All these are techniques. Right. So how these techniques are actually carried out, how these techniques are actually used, that we are going to discuss in the tomorrow's class. Okay. So interviews, questionnaire, social analysis, and prototyping. So interview, questionnaire, social analysis are old techniques. Right. Today they are not following it, but we can discuss that slightly. What is the meaning of it? In your syllabus, prototyping is there. Prototyping is there.